Well, hello, guys. Welcome back to Growing Through the Vents. This is Anitra, and we are walking into episode 5. Y'all have walked with me through finding healthier ways to communicate, in turn, healthier ways of love, how vulnerability went from an insecurity to a staple in continuing my growth, to help me find a confidence I've learned I can't get from anyone else. Building a foundation of knowing the difference between what's in my control and what's not in my control, all of which have helped me not only understand, but enforce my boundaries respectfully and receptively. But I have to be clear that my boundaries are my boundaries and that yours may look different, and that's okay. Even how I enforce them may not be how you would, and again, that's okay. I would also love to know about your boundaries and how you enforce them. Many times you don't even know there needs to be a boundary in areas until they've been crossed and you're like, oh yeah, no, that does not sit well with me. How do I prevent it from happening again in the future? And boom, you now know an area you won't, or at least don't want to, tolerate certain behaviors, actions, words, or even lack of. I know a lot of my boundaries are enforced because when I didn't have a boundary there, it led to hurt, either to me or by me. And I wouldn't want to repeat such patterns or behaviors. And I've worked really, really hard to get to this level of peace, let alone maintain it, to let it be disrupted or willingly disrupt somebody else's. Like I've said, life's hard enough already. I'm not here to make yours or mine any harder. And when you're learning boundaries and figuring out which boundaries are important and which ones align depending on situations or scenarios, I've expressed in one of the previous episodes that I tend to keep my worlds separated. A lot of that, reflecting back, was based on not knowing how to have boundaries any other way. I have had to learn that in a few different areas in life, in relationships, in family, in work. And the more people you know within your physical population, the more susceptible it is for boundaries to blend one way or another. So I'll keep my personal and social life separated from my family life, and I'll mix them every so often, but on my terms. And in some areas, I grew up knowing that there's a time and place for everything. And growing up with the boys, I definitely knew not everything is for everyone to know. And having such a close family by all means is an absolute blessing, but can also leave extremely blurry lines when boundaries are necessary, or more so, where boundaries are necessary. I didn't grow up with a whole lot of secrets from my family. Yeah, sure, the adults didn't know everything that us cousins talked about, or even being one of the oldest, or maybe just being nosy. I knew some things that the cousins weren't supposed to. Same with the boys and parents, or even other people. Not to mention having all of these hard-headed boys around in situations that were nobody else's business, yet somehow indirectly interfered in my world. So growing up, I would tell my family basically everything. Maybe not everyone within the family, but at least someone within it. And oftentimes, if they felt something needed to be different on my end, I wouldn't necessarily hesitate. I would just adjust. People please in most situations. Again, it's not that it was necessarily expected that I would people please or just adjust accordingly, but kind of, especially when it was the reaction I was known to give. It was a habit to not ask too many questions and to trust the process and go with it. It was typically like that to be in my best interest or the best interest of someone directly around me. And like I've expressed, I would keep myself in a box, even though I knew I didn't have to. And many people of those that protected that box could be a bit overprotective. in ways that caused them to perceive situations that I was going to and willing to stand 10 toes down for as something they needed to protect me from. Rather than not seeing it as a boundary they were crossing until I boldly, loudly, and even somewhat dramatically, sometimes for good reason, stood 10 toes down for something that was for me. At least this specific situation for the season of my life. A very pivoting and growing experience. I mean, if you see someone in an unhealthy situation, by all means, please be the support they need to learn their worth, their value, and to know what love can be. But I was in a situation that showed me a confidence I hadn't known before, a happiness that was new and refreshing, and though many weren't present to see, and it may not have been the most mature situation, it wasn't fully unhealthy. It was just young. I definitely was able to know what love was and what it felt like, even if it were not the love that's meant to last forever. It allowed me to learn what love could be, especially knowing that there's something even more fitting for me than what I've already experienced. Whatever that may be with whomever that's intended to be with. And at the end of it, we all came together and were able to communicate things, which has allowed us to move forward from the situation and have healthier and more clear boundaries. Even if it does lead to me having to keep my world separated if those boundaries are not respected, because though I will not undermine people's perceptions or perspectives, their values or worth, I refuse to lessen mine. If they want something for a lower value, they can shop elsewhere because, yes, some situations require compromise, but the compromise should be within the boundaries of both parties. If that's not the case, I will not cross boundaries. I will simply adjust the board as necessary and make the next move accordingly to learn whichever lesson I am to have gotten from the situation. Sometimes some situations should fall in the category of what's understood does not need to be explained. But I'll explain because I know the majority don't know the context to understand. And I'm grateful that we have all learned, healed, and have grown since going through such experiences. But really, the hardest boundaries to enforce are the ones that didn't necessarily exist to the people that have been around. It's a lot easier to enforce boundaries that are initially introduced at the introduction. But when you're having to enforce boundaries to those that have been around you and are not used to certain boundaries, feelings can definitely rise. This is why I try to be as transparent as possible when communicating, because I've been more vague in situations which have led to miscommunication and have exploded in my face. But again, I also know not everything is for everyone, and that there is a time and place for certain things. On top of understanding myself, my worth, and value, along with what is and isn't in my control. I've learned that if I overreact, I don't like the feeling afterwards. And when I underreact, people aren't as willing to see or hear my perspective. Kind of like closed mouths don't get fed. But again, it's personalized. Ultimately, boundaries help you stay disciplined with what you're willing to accept from yourself or from others, and accepting what you're comfortable with. So I went through that one breakup, right? And after the fact, I gave back my promise ring. And when I did, I remember being told that I could keep it, that I didn't have to give it back. And my response was, I don't want a ring full of broken promises. Looking back, I could have thought it without saying it because it wasn't truly necessary for me to say out loud. In fact, it was probably just hurtful because intentions behind the ring weren't to be broken. But it kind of just happened, and it's how I felt in that moment. And I was not at the point where I didn't hesitate so much to speak off of feelings or emotions, whereas now I prefer not to. Regardless, though, it was how I felt, especially at that time. So the first Valentine's Day I spent without that person, and honestly, the Valentine's Day I was going through a really hard time during my cancer journey. I wanted to do something special for myself. That year, during the month of February, which marked 1 year since we had moved out of our apartment and away from each other longer than like 2 months, and we were at a point where we had no contact, which allowed me to heal in ways I needed to, allowing me to understand that there is nobody that you could 100% guarantee to keep your promise. Or more so, you can't control, make, or force anyone to keep a promise other than being able to make and keep a promise to and for myself. And to me, that's what boundaries are. The promises we make to ourselves and learning the discipline it takes to maintain those boundaries, maintain those promises. That year, I bought myself a promise ring, and I made a promise to myself to be more self-aware and to process before I react. That I wouldn't react off of feelings or emotions, because that often leads to over or underreacting, and I would rather communicate clearly and receptively. That I wouldn't take other people's actions or reactions so personally, because I prefer to broaden my perception and decide which option is best in my next move in this chess game that we call life, so that I'm still able to play checkers and enjoy the moments, knowing that ultimately what's meant to be will be. When people get to know me, they often feel or assume that I'm just super passive, and therefore my vulnerability and passiveness comes from a soft place rather than an intentional gentleness. That I let too much stuff go, or I'm too patient. But I think it's a little bit misunderstood, or only a selective few have seen me overreact to know how dramatic and extra she can be, she being me. But I understand how it must look when I prefer not to give a reaction, considering most of my reactions are pretty silent. One thing I have learned to be aware of when a boundary is crossed is asking myself whether or not I'm over or underreacting. And a reaction is still an action, and every action is followed by a reaction. So what is going to be the opportunity cost of my reaction? And does it align with my boundaries and within maintaining my peace? If you know, or more so know and value the other person's boundaries, does it also align with theirs, or do adjustments need to be made? Because I may not be able to control what other people's boundaries are, but I can adjust accordingly, even if that comes with change rather than either party trying to force the other party to fit in a box that they don't align with. This is when learning to love people from a distance has been important. And understanding how other people feel is not in your control if you have clearly and receptively communicated, even if you're not being heard. You can't control whether or not somebody is going to hear or understand you. You can just lay it out as clear as possible. Boundaries are hard sometimes, even just figuring them out, and you don't want to disappoint anyone. But you're not willing to sell yourself short. So ultimately, you can only move with an open heart, pure intentions, and know that what's meant for you will not pass you. Boundaries come from a place of self-awareness. Honoring them comes from a place of love and even consideration, but practicing them is a discipline. It takes work and maintenance, and having to tell yourself no when it comes to accepting anything less than the promises that you've made for yourself. It's knowing that you have the choice to decide what you are or aren't willing to accept, and understand that each choice comes with a consequence. So being understanding of the consequences that may come from enforcing boundaries, and know that if another party is involved, they also have choices. Personally, that's why I felt episode 1 through 4 were important. Because to have healthy boundaries and to enforce them healthily, respectfully, receptively, and effectively, at least to me, it is understanding how to communicate and love yourself enough to know that you set the standard for not only the love you give, but the love and communication you receive. I can't tell you which boundaries you need or where you need to draw the lines, but I can be honest about my boundaries and the times I lacked having them or didn't know how to be consistent with them or enforce them, or the times it took for me to trial and error where I needed to draw the line. Even the reactions, opportunity costs, or consequences that came when I've had to enforce them. There's a quote, and I honestly don't know who originated it, but I've seen it on social media often, and it says, stop asking why they keep doing it and start asking yourself why you keep allowing it. And boy, oh boy, do I know that can be so much easier said than done. Maybe it's someone close to you and boundaries may change the dynamic of the relationship. Maybe enforcing boundaries will lead you to a place of isolation and you've never had to be alone before. There's a world full of unknowns when you start doing new things. And I'm here to tell you to do it anyways. From experience, of course, especially if you're uncertain of the outcome from having these boundaries. And not everyone is going to respect them. You may not even realize all of the change that comes from setting boundaries. But I challenge you that next time someone says or does something knowingly triggering to you, ask yourself why you keep allowing it. And I'm going to be a little transparent without going into too much detail, but before the breakup, at the beginning of the relationship, a lot of people had a lot of feelings and emotions. I mean, it was my first serious relationship and I didn't communicate well that it was something I had wanted or something I was working mutually in pursuing with this person. So my loving and protective family went into full defense. This is when the overprotectiveness was crossing boundaries. I was not being heard. It was like I was yelling at a lifeguard that I'm in fact not drowning. I actually walked in the water on my own and I'm enjoying my swim. But they just try to come and save you anyways. And if you know me then or currently, you know how important my family is to me. How much I love and value them. And that I'm with them multiple times a week. These are my people. We are genuinely a close family, built-in besties, and I wouldn't trade them for the world. But at that time, it legit felt like 95% of those around me felt some type of way or would rather keep the peace with those that had such strong feelings and emotions rather than feeling like I had any support from anyone. And again, the relationship they felt so strongly about may have been young and in areas immature, but I was valued and loved, and even being young, it wasn't super unhealthy. It wasn't very unhealthy. I was grown enough to know better for myself and honestly would have thought that those that were so defensive would have known that I was still the same niche with the values, morals, respect, and awareness that I was raised with. So why would you question my character? At least that was my perspective. It was a bit depressing. It was not pretty for a while, but I indeed stood 10 toes down. After a couple months of unhealthy communication and behaviors between me and my family, I hopped on a plane and moved 1,400 miles away with my now ex. This was the first time I did something so drastic, but it was for me. Not for my ex, not for my family, for me. Because I could not find peace here in Kansas City. The support system I had my whole life felt so far away, yet we were literal minutes apart. And I'm trying to respect other people's feelings and giving myself the leftovers, even if that's not how they saw it. That's what I was so used to doing anyways, that I didn't even know how not to. So then me enforcing boundaries was perceived as me moving funny or acting different, when I was just no longer going to minimize myself for anyone. That I was going to do the things that were good for me, that helped me grow. But yeah, that was basically the first time I was introduced to my own boundaries. It took a while, but things healed, because what's meant for you won't pass you. And my family and I were definitely meant to be a unit, but now they know and respect my boundaries. I now know and respect my boundaries. They and I know it's not out of obligation that we're so close, but out of love and respect, because I can keep my personal and private life separated from my family life if necessary, if boundaries are not respected. But we communicate better now that boundaries are enforced, that I don't see the situation repeating itself for any of us, from any of us, considering we have definitely learned from it. And as much as it hurt all of us in the situation to go through it, it also made it clear to me that if I could stand strongly on boundaries with the people that mean the absolute most to me, I can enforce them with anyone. Especially because at the end of the day, you are the only person in control of you. And the only person with you 24/7 your entire life. So you have to do what is best for you. Well, within boundaries. I've been there where it's scary or hard. It's been lonely, or even just mourning an old version of me that I no longer am willing to be, where I now feel liberated for who I'm growing into, rather than fear or mourn it. It's not simple. It's not just black and white. There's not a perfect way of finding or setting boundaries. But the work and the discipline to push yourself to do it, it's so worth it. If for nothing else, for you and your peace. The flower for this week's episode is a yarrow, known for symbolizing many things, but connecting to this episode by being named after Achilles due to the recognition the flower has received for protecting vulnerability the way that boundaries do. Yarrow allows us to remain sensitive and open, yet maintain the integrity of our healthy boundaries, according to FES flowers, though. The flowers, though, serve their protecting purpose, grow colorfully and beautifully, and I hope you do too. Thanks for spending some time with me. Thank you for your patience, and also thank you for continuing to help me stay motivated through all of life's obstacles. I love spending this time together, unconventionally growing through the vents. Y'all take care. We'll talk soon. Bye.